Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
This is Jane. She thinks she's just filling her car, but she's also filling the air with cancer-causing toxic chemicals used to boost octane in gas. What doesn't burn in the engine enters the air and your lungs, even your heart and brain. Bad for everyone, especially kids. Ethanol is a natural octane booster, clean burning and non-toxic. More ethanol means less scary stuff in our gas and in the air we breathe. And that makes your choice pretty plain, Jane. American Ethanol, cleaner air for Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Bryce Duskin. On this episode, Doug Simon discusses corn and soybean markets. Kirsten Hillman provides an update on NAFTA. Jim Jansen highlights the 2018 Nebraska Farm Real Estate Market Survey. And Austin Duerfeldt reminds us the importance of negotiation. Doug Simon from Tredas is our market analyst this week. Grain futures have bounced back after market pressure drove them down early in the week. Positive corn export news was drowned in the wake of selling. Soybean exports continue to come in low, now 9% behind the rate projected. Weather concerns for the soybean crop in South America shifted from Argentina to Brazil. Domestically, rain across much of Kansas triggered a downturn in wheat as parts of the southern plains fell into an exceptional drought. Meanwhile, outside pressure continues to mount due to President Donald Trump's decision on placing tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. We talked with Doug Thursday morning and began by asking him how the tariff discussions are influencing commodity trade.
Well, on Thursday morning, Donald Trump was supposed to announce like $50 billion in tariffs and worried about intellectual property rights. And so there's a lot of talk about that, but hopefully you're hearing stuff from the Chinese premier. He's saying that he's open to more open markets and less restrictions. And so you're kind of hearing kind of the wide sidelines about what's going to happen in trade, and hopefully there are going to be more negotiations. We're hearing that there's going to be more negotiations on the NAFTA side of it, that we've set those kind of guidelines or sidelines, so to speak, and then we're going to come back to the middle and hopefully get some things really bear down and get down to the details and actually have some improvement for the agricultural sector, hopefully on the NAFTA side of it. And eventually there's definitely a lot of concerns about the exports, say, of U.S. soybeans to China, if they would impose tariffs on us, because we export a lot of soybeans. Brazil exports a lot of soybeans to China. U.S. attaché, for example, this last week said that they expect China to import about 100 million metric tons of soybeans. USDA is saying about 97. That's a lot of soybeans, and they got to come from somewhere. So it's not like they're going to completely shut off the U.S. soybean exports. So there's still a lot of beans to be exported here to go into China.
Well, on that note, corn and soybeans both continue to lag in terms of export numbers. Talk about corn first in terms of those exports and what you see there.
Well, we had 2 years ago a drop in the safrinha crop in Brazil. And so that gave us a lot of export opportunity last year. They've had a lot more competition with us just here in the last marketing year. And so our exports are down from where they were a year ago. So we're lagging that, but we've had a little better pace because our prices were low relative to other exporters. So we've been able to gain back some market share, but we're still down from where we were last year. And the same thing with soybeans. We're about 18% off the pace of soybean exports from last year. They've improved here with the prospect of the lower Argentine crop. So, we have a little bit of prospects, but overall, our exports are down from where they were a year ago on both corn and beans.
How long will it take to make up those numbers?
Well, with the trade war talk going on, there's some psychological barriers there, and that has an impact. You think back to 2012 when we had $8 corn, it took us a while to gain back that export share. So unfortunately, it disrupts trade, and it gives people, hey, do I need to look for other sources of those imports? So it definitely has some impact, but if you look at going into next year with the Argentine soybean crop being lower, there's going to be better opportunities down the road for U.S. exports of soybeans. And the corn side of it, when you look at it, there's some opportunities down the road just because of the fact if you look at the world carryover on corn, that's actually one thing that's kind of exciting because it dropped from 220 million metric tons down to about 200 million metric tons. And when you look into next year in new crop, we'll talk about that in a minute. When you look at that balance sheet there, it's actually a little bit tighter and a little more optimistic than the soybean side. And so there might be some more opportunities on corn exports down the road.
Two big reports are due at the end of this month, at the end of March. Talk about those reports and remind us their importance.
They're really important. We're seeing record kind of stocks of March 1st on both the corn and the beans. The beans are just over 2 billion. Corn's, I think, up in that 8.8 billion bushel range. Those are record large numbers, so there's really adequate stocks. So we've had rallies here recently in the face of those big stocks, but it's definitely going to be important, going forward. I think the acre numbers that we're going to see here, those are going to have more bearing. If you look at the soybeans, we're kind of expecting maybe 90.5 million acres to 91 million acres of beans. The corn maybe in that 88 to 89. So you've seen a number where the beans are actually now higher than corn acres, which is the first time ever to see that. But going forward, that lower corn acre number and having some type of deviation in yields from trend really kind of gives you the opportunity maybe for higher prices down the road, more so than I'd say on the bean side. With those bean acres being that high, we're going to have maybe 700 bushels of beans carry over next year. That's one of the largest numbers ever, if probably a record large number in that, in terms of actual number. But we'll have to see how those numbers change through the year, based on weather and how those yields come out. So.
And speaking of weather, Doug, we continue to see weather driving the markets, especially as we move out of Argentina, as we look at those concerns and into Brazil, and then we look towards the United States weather forecast. Talk about how that's affecting.
Well, the Argentine weather story is pretty much drawn to a close. I mean, their crops are very mature now at this point. The safrinha crop in Brazil is off to a very good start, and it doesn't look like that's in any danger. They've had adequate rains there. The rainy season seems to be progressing pretty well, so they don't seem to be concerned about that. Looking at the drought monitor in the U.S., you can see that there's a very dry area in southwest Kansas. They got some rain in central Kansas. A little bit of the panhandle Oklahoma this last week will help the wheat a little bit, but it's still in very poor conditions down there. But the big question is you've got kind of a wetter eastern corn belt area with more rains kind of slated for there later this week. The big picture is that we're kind of in that not El Nino, we're not La Nina, we're kind of in between, which probably gives us a little more weather volatility going forward.
You always like to ask the question, what are we going to do about it when it comes to these markets? So what are you recommending to people as we move into April in terms of their marketing?
We like to look at pre-harvest marketing where we sell ahead of time. You want to be selling increments over time, and usually your prices in the springtime are higher than they are in the fall, so we want to take advantage of that. And so we've been selling new crop corn, new crop beans. When you look at the break-evens, we've been above that here recently, so we definitely want to take advantage of that. Option volatility is low right now relative to historical averages. So if you're worried about prices going up later, there's some cheap option strategies that you can put into place to kind of help you with that, kind of give you the encouragement to sell. But given the fact that crop insurance season just ended, if you bought revenue protection insurance, you definitely want to be looking at those forward sales and doing that in conjunction. So we also look at old crop corn. We've had very good prices here lately. The basis levels, surprisingly, have held in here well, considering the rallies that we've had. Basis on beans is probably about 20 cents wider, but we've had a very big rally there, so it makes sense to be still moving old crop corn, old crop beans on the recent rallies that we've had because they've been very favorable for us.
Next week, Lee Schultz, Iowa State Extension livestock economist, will join us to discuss cattle and hog markets. In 2017, Nebraska exported $7.2 billion worth of goods. Among Nebraska's top 5 export markets, Canada leads with about $1.5 billion worth of export goods. According to Kirsten Hillman, Deputy Ambassador for Canada, the Canada and Nebraska trade relationship is strong. She says 22% of all goods exported from Nebraska travel to Canada. Kirsten was in Lincoln last week for the inaugural CME Group Foundation Symposium hosted by the Yider Institute. The symposium focused on the impacts of trade from global to local. We spoke with Kirsten at the symposium to learn more about Canada's trade relationship with Nebraska, along with an update on NAFTA.
Clayton Yoder was a really important figure in international trade, worked very hard both at the World Trade Organization and in the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement to establish strong, reliable rules for trade between our two countries.
According to the U.S. Department of Commerce International Trade Administration report, exports from Nebraska helped contribute to the $2.3 trillion of U.S. goods and services exports in 2017.
So, the Canada-Nebraska trade relationship is incredibly strong. We are your #1 export destination for goods from Nebraska, and in fact, 22% of everything that is exported from Nebraska comes to Canada. And a lot of people might think, well, those would be agricultural commodities. But in fact, the largest by value export to Canada is in machinery. A lot of that's agricultural machinery. And then after that, of course, beef exports and feed for animals are also very significant exports.
The U.S. Department of Commerce International Trade Administration report says Nebraska exported about $7.2 billion worth of goods to foreign markets in 2017. $1.5 billion of this total comes from Nebraska and Canada exports.
You know, what's really interesting about trading relationships, especially ones that are as strong and integrated as ours, is that everything is interconnected. So we purchase your machinery, and we purchase many of Nebraska's agricultural commodity exports. But at the same time, the transport industry, for example, Warner Trucking. Warner Trucking has over 20,000 trips between the United States and Canada every single year in order to transport some of those goods. Or ethanol production in Canada, we have a requirement that all gasoline must have at least 5% renewable product in it. And we are only able to produce about 50% of our needs in the area of ethanol. So we are a major importer of ethanol from Nebraska. So all of these things, these agricultural, manufacturing, services sectors, they're all interconnected when economies such as ours and yours become tied in relationships, business relationships get built.
In addition to Nebraska and Canada's economic relationship, we talked with Kirsten about the current status of the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA.
So the NAFTA is a negotiation right now where what we're trying to do is update an agreement that's almost 25 years old. And a lot has changed in 25 years. And so as governments, and certainly my government, what we're most interested in is making sure that we make NAFTA make sense for our citizens and for all three countries today. And we're working really hard at that, and we're making good progress. At the last round of negotiations that just concluded less than 2 weeks ago, we, for example, closed up the chapter on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which is an updated chapter that will be really important to farmers and ranchers in Canada and from Nebraska. So what we should be looking for is to build on our success. The NAFTA has been incredibly successful for our three countries. It has, the GDP of our region has doubled since the introduction of the NAFTA, and we need to build on that and provide a really competitive environment going forward.
As mentioned, Kirsten Hillman was in Lincoln for the CME Group Foundation Symposium hosted by the Yider Institute. You can learn more about the symposium at news.unl.edu. Farmland market value in the state of Nebraska continues to decline. According to a preliminary report of the 2018 Nebraska Farm Real Estate Market Survey, this year marks the fourth consecutive year of the downward trend since reaching a high in 2014. Jim Jansen, a UNL Extension Educator, says the market survey divides the state into 8 districts. The 2018 market value of farmland in the state averaged $2,745. We recently spoke with Jim and began by asking him how the market survey was conducted.
The 2018 Nebraska Farm Real Estate Market Survey and Report is an annual survey conducted by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln of land professionals across the state. These folks include land managers, agricultural appraisers, as well as agricultural bankers. These are the folks for their profession. They have an insight onto the land industry in terms of what things are selling for, how much things are renting for, what are the financial constraints of the transactions that are occurring. So it's a very small population of folks that do this across the state, but they have firsthand knowledge because of the number of transactions that they might see or deal with each year.
According to Jim Jansen's Crop Watch article, the results of the 2018 Nebraska Farm Real Estate Market Survey shows another year of downward pressure.
So the preliminary estimates that came out on March 14th, 2018 provided a summary on land values in addition to cash rent by region of the state. We divide the state of Nebraska into 8 different regions. These 8 regions include the Northeast, North, Northeast, Central, East, Southwest, South, and Southeast. These 8 regions share similar production attributes and constraints related to rainfall, soil type, whatever it might be. From this information, we see in the land values for the state of Nebraska are down about 3% across the state. There were a few regions where it was a little bit more, some regions that were less. Cash rents were down slightly as well. It's kind of a mixed year given the situation we have on crop prices. We have very similar expectations for crop prices recently than what we did to 2017. Up until about 6 weeks ago, things were down still. Things look a little bit better now, so the expectations of many folks are a little bit higher.
We further asked Jim if any of the 8 Nebraska regions showed significant changes.
So related to cash rental rates and the percent changes that we've seen, there were a few cases where they were up slightly, but we've seen a lot of pressure in southwest Nebraska on irrigated cash rental rates. That wouldn't be surprising given some of the policies that are affecting the availability of groundwater there. Overarching, there were dryland croplands, there were a few cases that were up just slightly, but the majority of the state, things were trending down. And keeping in mind, these are simply an average. This doesn't tell the whole story, and that's why we also publish the average of the low third grade and average of the high third grade, which would be the lower quality as well as higher quality land. So you have to think about how does your county sit relative to the region where you are located at.
According to Jim, survey participants also indicated that property taxes are one of the landowner's most critical concerns during rental negotiations.
So when it comes to negotiating cash rents in Nebraska, many folks make comments on our surveys. A few things to note. One, on the cash rental rates for irrigated cropland, that is a number assuming the landlord owns the entire irrigation system. So if you are an individual that brings a pivot, the power unit, some component of the irrigation system, you'd more than likely discount some of the rental rates that are reflected in our results to compensate the tenant for their contribution. Because if the tenant owns a pivot, the ground sold, more than likely they're going to take the pivot with them. It's not an improvement the landowner owns. Also, when it comes to grazing land, major things like fencing, weed control, so we're talking thistles, yucca plants, cedar trees, whatever it might be. If you have a landlord or a tenant that's willing to do some of those things, that would reflect value into the lease for one party or the other. That would probably as well reflect negotiating an equitable cash rental rate.
According to Jim, these final results from the survey will be published in June 2018.
So when it comes to finding any information on real estate in Nebraska, the website that we take a look at is agecon.unl.edu/real estate. On there we have the preliminary estimates that were published, in addition to our entire real estate report series, which provides much greater detail on things like who's buying land, who's selling land, financial things of that nature, as well as some helpful resources on negotiating cash rents and other considerations you might take a look at.
You can learn more about the 2018 Nebraska Farm Real Estate Market Survey by reading Jim's CropWatch article online at cropwatch.unl.edu. After more than 15 years of development, growers in the High Plains will have access to new Proso millet variety. This variety, known as Plateau, will become available this spring. Plateau will be the first waxy variety to be launched in the United States. Currently, the majority of U.S. Proso millet is exported for bird feed in Europe. With Plateau, there is more potential for use in specialty human food markets. You can read more about the development of Plateau and its market potential in the March Nebraska Farmer. You may be familiar with the Farmers and Ranchers College from our previous interviews with Steve Jansen and Brad Lubin. At the workshop series, we also sat down with Austin Duerfeldt, who joined the Nebraska Extension team in January. Austin specializes in farm accounting and negotiation strategies. According to Austin, negotiation is a large part of everyday life. He says that by thinking outside the box, negotiation has the potential to save on operation expenses. We recently spoke with Austin about the importance of knowing how and when to negotiate.
So negotiation is one of those things that not a lot of people necessarily have formal training on. And a lot of people look at it and say, well, I only buy a car once every 5 years. But the fact of the matter is, it's a little bit deeper than that. You go through and you start looking at it and you say, yeah, I buy equipment and I buy cars. I also negotiate my farm cash rent. And then you get to looking at it even further, and at times you're sitting there and you all of a sudden realize, I'm negotiating with my child as whether or not they should be eating their vegetables. I'm negotiating with my spouse and my family as to where I want to eat tonight. If I want to go down 179 or if I want to go on Highway 75. Negotiation is a large part of everyday life, and I think it can benefit a lot of people just knowing a couple of tips and understanding what the process is.
Austin Duerfeldt is currently working on a new extension series of negotiation classes designed to provide helpful tips and tricks that one can use when negotiating.
Just the fact that it's part of everyday life, and since starting an extension as a Southeast educator, I've come to realize cash rent seems to be one of those hang-up points for a lot of people. As I get phone calls, everybody kind of wants to know what cash rent is going for as an average around the county that they're living in. I think they're kind of missing a key point to the whole process, and they're a little bit timid because they don't want to upset the other side. But understanding what the range that we're negotiating in and kind of what everybody's looking for, there's also the key is just the fact that a lot of times everybody gets hung up with the cash portion of it. How much do you want for me to cash rent this ground? But you're leaving a lot on the table with some other side notes, if you will, of things that could be negotiated with. One of the ones that I know I've come across before is somebody realized that they can't quite get the cash rent that the landowner wanted, but then they realized that they were leaving for Florida every winter. And so now all of a sudden there's this negotiation factor of, I can care for and watch after your house when you're down in Florida, and you won't have to worry about that. And it's those non-monetary items of negotiation that some people are leaving on the table.
A method Austin recommends producers use while negotiating is the Ackerman bargaining method.
When you start talking about car purchases and big equipment, you start to run into something that's a little bit more hard-nosed than some of the other situations you look at. I put out an article on Crop Watch that talks about the Ackerman bargaining method. It's a lot more of figuring out what your target price is and trying to work your way. And then, just as I was talking about non-monetary features, a lot of times what you'll run into is these dealerships, they'll come up with extended warranties or something that's cheap for them to offer but offers value to you, and you have to just understand kind of what that value is.
From applying the Ackerman bargaining method to learning how to communicate with all types of negotiators, Austin's goal is to make sure all are comfortable when negotiating.
Later this spring, we're hoping to hammer out the finalized details, and maybe late summer go ahead and start doing some programs and some seminars and try and make them a little bit more interactive, where you'd be given a scenario and you'd actually run through a negotiation process with somebody else. Crop Watch is a great resource. I'm trying to do Gold Star Negotiation. It's going to be a series. More places in terms of if you're wanting to find out more about negotiation. Harvard Law School actually has a great blog and series that you can subscribe to and find out some tips and tricks that, these are things that are being offered in courses for CEOs and high-powered companies, and they do a great job of trying to provide that resource and make it available for everybody.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension Ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we again for the weekly forecast, and during this last 7 days, most of the major precipitation occurred last week into the early part of the week. For a vast majority of the states, we had two pieces of upper air lows moving across the region. The first one brought heavy precipitation in northern and eastern Nebraska, with lesser amounts as you got into around the I-80 corridor, then a secondary area of a little bit in the quarter to a half an inch range around the Kansas-Nebraska border. And the second low came out on Sunday. That dropped some pretty significant moisture across portions of north central Kansas, and south central Kansas, although there were gaps between these precipitation areas. Basically, that was a dry air that was entrained into these storms from those unusually dry areas of the southwest. So in order to see how bad the situation is to our southwest, let's look at the current drought monitor in retrospect to the drought. And we have a wide, expansive area of D3 conditions, which is basically your severe to extreme drought. Exceptional drought, there's just a couple little pockets in north central portions of Oklahoma. And this area has been building back toward the west, unfortunately. Has been limited somewhat for the movement toward the north. And on the eastern extent, we've had some decent precipitation events. So the hope is that we will see a couple precipitation events to at least alleviate some of these conditions, but it's not looking good as we move into the heart of the wheat growing season. Now, as we look at today's upper air model, we do have a trough to the west that was responsible for bringing some of that moisture over the last 24 hours and is responsible for the current ongoing precipitation in eastern Nebraska, and that will slide to our east as the day progresses. We do have a series of low pressure systems to our south and to our west, with the majority of the moisture, at least for today, will remain to the east of us as that first piece of energy from that trough to the west pivots into the eastern United States. And then we see that trough digging into the southwest, kind of splitting a little bit from the northern stream flow. A surface low indicated develop tomorrow, or on Sunday, excuse me, in southeastern Colorado. And we may see some snowfall to the north and west of there with a little bit of light precipitation showing in eastern Texas, but then that system digs much deeper on Monday. Deep vegetable moisture gets trained up into the central corn belt. We have a surface low over the Texas Panhandle. That's going to really be able to move some of that Gulf moisture northward, and that overrunning will basically lay out the foundation of snow across the Dakotas and Nebraska, northwestern Nebraska, but the heavier precipitation to the south. And then as we go into Tuesday, upper air low slides into the western Texas, low pressure down in the Deep Bend area of Texas will continue the precipitation trend, particularly from eastern Oklahoma up into Illinois. This looks to be very heavy precipitation, and we slowly see that migrate a little bit farther to the east on Wednesday. Another piece of energy coming from the northern string will bring a little bit cooler temperature to the northern plains, but the main precipitation will still remain to the south of us. Exceptionally heavy precipitation expected once again in the same areas that received it from before. This looks eerily similar to what happened during February in this region. And then by Thursday, we start to see this system starting to move toward the southeastern United States. Surface low situated over the southeastern United States, widespread area of heavy precipitation. Severe thunderstorms are likely in this area, and then this will start to pivot up the eastern seaboard, particularly as we get into the day on Friday. That low will merge out into the Atlantic Ocean, then ride right up the northeastern United States for another yet snowstorm in the cards for them as we go into late next weekend. We do show some low surface lows in the high plains, but there is no moisture as it remains to the east of us. As we look at the 8 to 14-day forecast, that cool air looks like it's going to stay in place across the northern plains as another surge of cold air comes in. And in terms of precipitation, most of this precipitation associated with that low pressure system will exit out of the region as we go through late next weekend.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, the facts behind Nebraska and Canada's trade relationship, the trends in farmland values, and tips on negotiating. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Lee Schultz, Iowa State Extension livestock economist, will be our market analyst. Ruth Hamilton will discuss Annie's project, and Stephen Wegulo will discuss when producers should scout their wheat fields. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Bryce Duskett. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.